Mary was one of the great heroes of the Bible, right? I mean, didn't God choose her because of her saintly character? And especially for those of us that maybe have a Roman Catholic background, we look at that and we were told to revere Mary as one of the greatest people ever born. So let me take a few moments just to kind of step back from tradition and even religion and say, what does the Bible say about Mary? Who was Mary? Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to look at a very traditional Christmas passage, Luke chapter 1, where the angel appears to Mary. And let's see what we can see. What does it teach us about who she was? And there might be some things that are a little surprising. Well, let me go there. You have this on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and read from Luke 1, starting in verse 26. In the sixth month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. And he came to her and said, "Greetings, O favored one, the Lord is with you." But she was greatly troubled at the saying and tried to discern what sort of greeting this might be. And the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus. And he will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. And the Lord God will give to him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there shall be no end." And Mary said to the angel, "How will this be, since I'm a virgin?" And the angel answered her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore the child to be born will be called Holy, the Son of God. And behold, your relative Elizabeth in her old age has also conceived a son, and this is the 6th month with her who was called barren, for nothing will be impossible with God." And Mary said, "Behold, I am the servant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word." And the angel departed from her. Now we read that and we say there's some things that are there. So often, maybe many of us, we've heard this story many times, and there's some details that we kind of get so familiar with that we don't pay that much attention to. So let me pull out a few things. Okay, first of all, if you look at near the beginning, we're told that she was from the town of Nazareth. And now, here's what you need to realize. We have historical records that tell us a little bit about this town. It was a tiny little rural town. They estimate the population was probably between 100 to 200 people. Now, you think about that, that's significantly smaller than the number of people we have in the room right now. Now, historically, too, because she was not only a woman, but from this tiny little town, it's safe to conclude that she was almost certainly illiterate. Now, we can't know that for sure, but what we do know is that very few men in that time were formally educated, and almost no women were. And then when you add to that, this was a small, poor town. There were no schools of any kind. There wouldn't have been teachers. So she almost certainly was illiterate. And not only that, but then we're told in verse 27 that she was betrothed to a man named Joseph. Now, we read that, we kind of get an idea, but when's the last time you used the word betrothed? That's not a word that we use. We're not quite sure what it means. Well, it's similar to the idea of engagement, but it's also different. So when we have a couple that's engaged to be married, but the difference was that it was far more binding. You see, generally for them, their weddings were actually in two parts. Often the weddings, marriages were arranged by the parents, and the relationship became official at a first ceremony where they would exchange vows, and this was the betrothal. They would be considered married to each other, but they would not live together. They would not sleep together. And that would go for a year, and it was a time for them to prove their purity and their faithfulness until the wedding date. And then at the wedding date, they would come and they would celebrate the wedding, and they would consummate it, and they were fully married. But the fact here that we're told that she was betrothed tells us something significant about her. Because at that time in that culture, girls were generally given an engagement or betrothal between 12 and 14 years of age, and then married between 13 and 15 years of age. Now consider this historical picture of Mary, and what you see is maybe it disagrees with a little bit of what we sometimes see traditionally through art, or maybe even some of our religious backgrounds. When we think of this, I think of art. Just think of some of the pictures that we see in art. You'd often have Mary that she's there, and it's usually an older woman. She's dressed well. Sometimes she even has a crown of some kind, and she's holding this perfect baby, and people around her, or other pictures, they might take that that they always seem to keep the idea of age. So she's always older, but instead of a crown, now she's got a halo, and they got this perfect baby who's got a strangely mature-looking face, kind of like an adult face. It's kind of a weird face. I don't think that's, I don't know why they did that, but see, or we may even mentally have this picture and say, oh, Mary, she was a Bible scholar. She had probably memorized half of the Bible, and the reality was she was from a tiny town, poor town. She was probably illiterate, a young teenager. She's probably 13 or 14 years old. And if you think about it, there's not anything necessarily wrong with this picture, except if you have this picture of her being this mature scholar, this leader that had earned her place, that had earned based on her performance, that God said, okay, I'm going to use you because you're a leader. No, she's only, again, 13 or 14 years old. She's a middle schooler by our day. She's living under the authority of her parents. And, she's not old enough to have done anything yet. Now, that becomes even more clear when you look at the angel's words to Mary. Let me go to verse 28 of Luke 1, and look what the angel said. He came to her and said, "Greetings, O favored one, the Lord is with you." But she was greatly troubled at the saying and tried to discern what sort of greeting this might be. And then the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God, and behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and he will call his name Jesus." Now here's the part of that I want to draw out. When the angel comes to her and greets her, he says, "Greetings, O favored one." Now what does that mean? What's he talking about here? And it's actually the same word that he says a couple verses later when he says, "You have found favor with God." Now, the way that many of us have understood this in the past is the angel is coming saying, "Don't be afraid, Mary. You have earned God's favor. You've lived such a life, a wonderful life, that God has chosen you for this special task. You've proven that you're worthy." And that's one of the reasons that I think many of the pictures of art show this older, more mature woman. Because if we have this idea that, that she earned it, she had to be older. She had to have performed. She had to have done something. But what does it mean? What is this word? Here's a place where and it doesn't happen often, but where you have an English translation of the word, and it can give us a misconception, almost a wrong idea of actually what's being said. When he says, "Oh, favored one, you have found favor." Think of, when's the last time anyone said favored one? You're my, oh, favored one. Has anybody called you that? Have you called anybody that? Again, we don't speak that way. Now, we use the word, we just use a different form of the word. Right? We don't say favored one, we say, "She's my favorite." Now, think about how we use that term. When we say that someone's a favorite, it's usually a designation that's earned. So we'll say, "She's my favorite," and right away we follow it with "because." She's my favorite because she works so hard, or she has a great sense of humor, whatever it would be. It's almost always associated with something that the person has done. Now, here's what you need to realize. The idea of Mary being favored of God is not at all this idea. It's not something that was earned. In fact, the word that is translated favored is actually the same Greek word that we usually translate grace. It means to grace, to honor, to favor, but it's always an emphasis on what is freely given, not what is earned. So when we think about Mary, Mary's favor before God was not an earned favor, but God's favor that was given by grace, by unmerited favor, by God's gift. So the meaning of the angel's words isn't God has chosen you because you've earned this, but God has chosen to show you his favor for the special task because of his grace. In spite of the fact that you're a 13-year-old from nowhere that hasn't done anything yet. Now you might be asking, why is this important? We're talking about words here. Well, here's why it's vital. Because the emphasis isn't on earning God's reward, but God's grace. Mary had found God's grace. And this is the word that describes how we're saved. It's the word that describes the whole message of Jesus, of the gospel, of the New Testament. And when we look at that, how was Mary saved? By grace. She was chosen by grace. It's the same for all of us who become followers of Christ. We're chosen to be recipients of grace. God's favor is upon us. And so whether we're somebody like Mary or Rahab the prostitute or Tamar or people, no matter what the background, it's not whether we've earned it, it's by grace. And that's the message of Christmas, a message of the whole Bible. You think about Mary. Why did God choose Mary? I mean, she could have chosen the old mature. He could have chosen, somebody that was from wealthy or an educated woman or somebody that was from the priestly class. But he said, no, I choose Mary because that's my grace. And that's different than religion. The spirit of religion is all about what we do. It's about how do we perform? How do we earn God's favor? And so we're trying harder, and if we mess up, we feel like we're isolated from God. But God says, no, I'm going to take nobodies from nowhere, and I'm going to give them my love. I'm going to choose to use them, and I'm going to give significance and purpose so that I use the most unlikely for the greatest things ever.